Through Other Eyes. A Story of the Black Ship Universe. Chapter 6. The Weight That Remains. First watch in the commoner's mess was quieter than it should have been. Not silent, as the mess was never silent, but subdued. The usual noise of trays, voices, and off-shift complaints had dulled into something lower and tighter, like the ship itself was holding its breath. Kael Rynn sat at the table, shoulders slightly hunched, tray half-finished in front of him. He wasn't eating anymore. He hadn't been for a while. To his left, Petty Officer Mara Cade worked through her meal with mechanical precision, eyes down, expression unreadable. Beside her sat Senior Medical Technician Hale Marr, still new enough to the table that Kael had not decided whether to count him as a regular. To Keel's right, Corporal Bren Talon leaned back just enough to look relaxed, though the set of his jaw gave him away. Ordnance Crewman Tams Vex sat beside Hale, and even his normally energetic personality was subdued, a fact Kael appreciated. Senior Medical Technician Hale Marr didn't look like much at first glance. He was lean and pale, his dark hair cut short. Hale was the kind of man who blended into the background, easily missed if you weren't looking for him. But there was something in his eyes, flat, clinical, already done with whatever conversation you thought you were about to have. He set his fork down with quiet finality and looked at Kael. 16 came back, Marr said with no preamble. Keel's eyes flicked up as he said, 4 didn't. Bren shifted and Mara's fork paused for half a second. Marr continued, voice even. New squadron, Ensign Mern Paskin. And then, Warrant Officer Jace Rook. Kael didn't move. Delta Squadron, Sub-Lieutenant Evander Whitlock, the senior medic continued. Epsilon Squadron, Sub-Lieutenant Abacus Reed, 3 nobles, 1 commoner. Bren let out a slow breath through his nose. Yeah, he muttered. That's unusual. Mara shot him a quick look, subtle but sharp. Careful. Bren raised a hand slightly in acknowledgement, but didn't take it back. Marr didn't react at all. He just kept watching Kael. I was on intake, he said. 3rd watch triage. That got the chestnut-haired man's attention, and Marr leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, looking straight at Kael. Lord Whitlock made it to the hangar. Lord Paskin, we got fragments. Lord Reed and Jace Rook never made it to us. Kael swallowed once. Yeah, he said quietly. I know. And a short silence settled over the table. Bren broke it first. Jace shouldn't have been there. Keel's head turned, slow, and Bren met his eyes. You know it. Mara's voice came low. Bren. No, Bren said, quieter now, but firm. He shouldn't have been there. Kael looked back down at his tray. Jace knew where he was supposed to be, Kael said. Yeah, Bren replied. Behind a noble who decided doctrine didn't apply to him. The words hung heavy in the air between the two men. Marr spoke again, tone unchanged, a curious expression on his pinched face. From what I heard, he said, Rook moved before the scatter order. He did. Kael nodded. Why? Kael didn't answer immediately because the senior medical technician already knew why, because everyone at that table knew why. Finally, Kael said it anyway, because that's our duty. Bren let out a quiet, humorless laugh. Yeah, duty. Dying for blue bloods. Mara set her fork down and growled in the way only a deck boss can. Say it quieter. Better yet, don't say it at all, Corporal. Bren leaned forward now, elbows on the table, voice dropping. Commoners cover noble asses. Nobles lead. Nobles command. Commoners... Obey, Kael finished. The word tasted like something bitter as he spat it out. Hailmar watched the exchange with mild interest, like he was observing the known outcome of an experiment, but wanted to watch it through anyway. Rook followed doctrine, Mar said. He saw his wingman in danger and moved to intercept threat vectors. He didn't hesitate, Kael said, jaw tightened, and then, after a moment, "New one said it." That got all their attention. Kael leaned back slightly, eyes distant now, replaying it. "Over comms," he said, "right after the blast." His voice changed and became harder, echoing memories. "That idiot blue blood Paskin died because of vanity," Kael said. He took a quick drink of tea before continuing. "Lieutenant Ignala said that was the last time anyone should attempt to gain personal glory." Bren's lips pressed thin and Maracade didn't move as Kael continued, quieter now. "Then he said it," Kael continued. "Rook fulfilled his duty to the end." Silence followed, real silence this time as each of them thought about the statement. Mar broke it. "Lieutenant Ignala said that?" And Kael nodded. "Huh," said Mar, leaning back slightly and considering. Bren frowned. "What?" Mar shrugged faintly. "Most nobles wouldn't." "Yeah," exhaled Kael as he gave a small, humorless nod. Mara looked between the men. "It matters," she said quietly, and Kael glanced at her, seeing a glimmer of something in her eyes. "It does," she repeated. The lieutenant said it out loud. Bren rubbed a hand over his face. "Doesn't change what happened." "No," Kael said, his voice steady. "But it means he wasn't invisible. And that was something." Not enough, but something, thought Kael, and the tension in him relaxed, just a little. Mar tapped his fingers once against the table. "Rook performed above expectations across the board," he said. "I saw the competition logs." Keel's eyes narrowed slightly. "You did?" Mar nodded. "Commander Kalen's exercise. Your warrant officer placed high. Reaction times, decision-making, stress tolerance. He could have won that competition." Kael let out a slow breath. "Yeah," he said quietly. "He could have. Instead, he came in second." "Instead, he's a line in a casualty report," grunted Bren as he leaned back again, staring at the ceiling. Mara didn't correct him this time because he wasn't wrong, and they all knew it. "So is the noble that placed third in the competition," said Hailmar. "Sub-Lieutenant Evander Whitlock of Delta died this morning. He made it back to the Virtue, but with wounds from point defense fire." Keel's mind flashed back to the hangar yesterday, and he remembered the deck crew cleaning the bloody cockpit of a Delta Squadron Raptor, its canopy damaged by incoming fire. 3 men at the top of Commander Kalen's competition, and 2 of them are dead, he thought. The table quieted for a while, not talking, just being as they ate. Stilted at first, the conversation finally resumed, then drifted the way it always did when the commoners found themselves with uninterrupted time and a hot meal, which was to say, immediately toward complaints. "The Lieutenant Commodore Sil Murphy denied my requisition again," Mara Cade announced around a mouthful of food. No one looked surprised. "What was it this time?" asked Kael. "Replacement fuel couplings." Kael blinked and said, "That's not even an unreasonable request." "I know," said the diminutive woman around a mouth full of ration bar. "Why was it denied?" Mara pointed her fork at him. "Because apparently the couplings I currently have will—" Making a face and gesturing in a slight mocking of her commander, she continued, "See us through." Bren nearly choked on his tea. "How short are you?" "We have enough to service about 1/3 of the current squadron Raptors in an emergency." Kael frowned deeply. "That's a fuel coupling." "I am aware," said the Void Flight Director with ire. "Fuel is generally considered important to make the reactors work." Mara nodded. "That was my position as well. Thought about sending the request straight to Commander Teravis." Tams blanched, and he stammered, Vivian Taravis, are you crazy? You'll get flogged for sure. I didn't do it, Mara said. I just thought about doing it. Ordnance falls under logistics. You should know how the system works in our division. I do, said the little man. So did Sil Murphy eventually grant the fabricator access? No, replied Mara. And if we have another engagement, I won't be able to repair more than 2 squadrons worth of fuel systems. Tams Vex laughed. Did you tell them that? 3 times. And? The small man leaned in conspiratorially. Mara shrugged. He sent me a message explaining the current stock is still within acceptable tolerances. Bren barked a laugh. Acceptable to who? Kael said, someone who has never stood in a hangar. That narrows it down to every logistics officer. Mara pointed at him. Every blue-blood logistics officer. Bren gave her a wide smile. Exactly. For a moment, everyone chuckled, even Hale Marr, slightly, which for Hale, thought Kael, was the equivalent of hysterical laughter. Bren took a bite from the protein pap on his tray and shook his head. At least they answer your requests. Auxilia problems? Mara snorted at the corporal. Bren nodded in affirmation. Auxilia problems. What happened now? Bren gestured vaguely with his fork. We spent 6 hours yesterday guarding an empty storage compartment. Hale asked, why? Nobody knows. Someone important told you to? Asked Mara. Somebody important always tells us to. Tams tilted his head, suddenly very interested, and asked, what was in the compartment? Nothing. Nothing? Said the ordnance crewman incredulously. Bren sighed in frustration. Nothing. Tams laughed. No. Yes, Bren Talon said flatly. There had to be something. Bren's eyes focused over the top of his metal cup. Swallowing his tea, he said, there wasn't. Then why guard it? Bren spread his hands. Because some blue blood decided it was important. Hale finally spoke. That is the Royal Navy in a single sentence. Several heads nodded, and Kael pointed his fork toward the medic. How's medical going? What is it you all do when there are no flight missions? Hale looked offended. Terrible. Anything specific? Kael asked. Pilots. Kael immediately pointed at himself. Unfair. Entirely fair. What did we do? Said Kael defensively. Hale stared at him. You? Yes. Nothing recently. Kael relaxed. Then Hale continued. But yesterday one of the blue-blood Aquilon pilots managed to get her damaged bomber back to the Virtue. She was injured too and should be grounded. She refused the grounding order. Grounding order? Hale shrugged. She currently has her arm in a stimulation sling. Bren frowned. How do you refuse orders? The corporal was genuinely perplexed by the idea. You have blue blood and decide the commoner medical technician's directives are beneath you. Tams immediately started laughing, managing to get out. No, through his chuckles. Yes. Did it work? The crewman asked. No. It was worth trying, Tams said. Mar's dry, unamused voice stated, it was not. Mara shook her head. Pilots. Kael pointed toward himself again. Again. Unfair. You people think you're a level above us. We fly combat spacecraft, Kael said indignantly. When was the last time someone shot missiles at you in medical? He turned to Mara. Dodge a lot of coil gun rounds up in that office of yours? Bren and Tams both chuckled. Looking at Mara, Hale nodded toward Kael. This one showed up after the jump out of Ravensall 2 months ago with a fractured rib. Kael froze. Oh, no. Oh, yes. Mara immediately sat up straighter. You never mentioned that. It wasn't important. It was a fractured rib, said the deck boss in a concerned voice. There was only the one. Mara looked at him. Only one? Kael suddenly found his tray very interesting as Bren started laughing. "Oh, that's incredible. Did you ignore grounding orders too?" she asked, perturbed. Hale folded his arms. "He attempted to convince me it would heal faster if he ignored it." "It eventually healed," was Keel's meek reply. Mara's fork quickly pointed at Kael, her face irritated and concerned. "That is not a defense." It worked. Hale Mar's usually expressionless face suddenly animated. "It did not work because of your actions. That growth stimulator healed it." Tams was now openly grinning, and he looked at the pilot and said, "I feel better about my life choices." Kael snorted, "You load mines and missiles onto fighters." "Exactly." The table shared quiet laughter again, and the conversation wandered as it always wandered, and somehow they ended up discussing food, which led naturally to complaints. "The ration bars are getting worse," Bren declared. "They're not ration bars," Mara replied. "They're called ration bars." "They're called ration bars because calling them nutritional protein compound blocks would start a rebellion." "That is fair," said the auxilia corporal, as Kael cast a wary eye at the remaining ration bar in his hand. Setting the bar back on his tray, Kael poked suspiciously at the bowl of protein pap, his fork digging into the porridge-like substance. "I still don't know what this is." Mara looked and said, "Neither do I, but it doesn't taste terrible." Bren sighed. "It doesn't have a taste at all." Tams looked at the petty officer and said, "Don't you work in logistics?" Mara fixed a steely eye on the crewman and said, "So do you, Vex. I don't know how to run an armor fabricator either. Let's see a rating assigned to one of those try to run my hangar deck." That left the man looking abashed. Hale glanced over at Keel's tray and said, "Don't ask." "Why?" The senior medic answered with a toneless, "You don't want the answer." Tams immediately perked up. "You know the answer." "I do." Almost wide-eyed with curiosity, Tams Vex leaned forward and asked, "What is it?" "I'm not telling you." Tams's face fell in disappointment. "Why?" said the crewman. "Because I still need to eat here." That statement generated another round of soft laughter. For a few minutes, the tension that had settled over the ship after the previous day seemed farther away. Not gone, just farther away, like a storm sitting beyond the horizon. The conversation shifted again to the mundanities of the Navy. Maintenance schedules, duty rosters, and watch assignments, and the never-ending gripes about blue bloods. The sort of things everyone complained about and nobody could change. By the time Tams launched into a story involving an ordnance loader, a maintenance cart, and an extremely unfortunate collision with a lieutenant major's backside, every person at the table was paying attention. Even Hale, which was perhaps the greatest compliment anyone could give a story. "And then what happened?" asked Bren. Tams grinned. "The maintenance cart won." The entire table burst out laughing, causing heads to turn across the commoner's mess. It was like the laughter had lifted the shroud of tension that had settled over the ship, and the dour mood in the usually boisterous mess began to dissipate. Finally, Mara stood first, picking up her tray. "Return racks," she said. It wasn't an order, but it might as well have been. Bren pushed himself up next, grabbing his tray with one hand, and Hale Mar followed without a word. Kael stayed seated for a second longer, then he stood too. They moved together like they always did. Small habits, shared routines. The things that kept you moving when stopping meant thinking too much, though Kael felt different than he had earlier. At the return racks, trays slid into place one after another with dull metallic clacks. Bren peeled off first, muttering something about duty rotation. Mar lingered just long enough to glance at Kael. "They don't promote people like him," he said flatly. "So either he's useful," a slight pause, "or disposable." Kael didn't need to ask who. With his opinion expressed, the senior medical technician turned and left. Kael stayed. Kael was about to follow the others when he felt it, a hand on his arm. Light, careful. He stopped and looked down. Kael had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, all 5 feet of her standing square in front of him, her short, mousy brown hair falling back from her face. For once, she didn't look like the deck boss. She just looked tired. She looked human. "I'm sorry," she said quietly with no sarcasm, no edge, just the truth. Kael could see it in her eyes as they looked up at him. Kael didn't respond right away because there wasn't a response for that, because nothing she said could fix it, but it mattered anyway. His throat tightened just a fraction as he said softly, "Yeah, me too." Mara squeezed his arm once, then let go and turned toward the lifts. That was the commoner way of things. Commoners moved on. Around them, life kept moving as it always did, and Kael felt as if the weight had shifted, just enough for him to breathe. He took a deep breath and exhaled, feeling unburdened. Walking towards the lift, he chuckled again at Tams's story and thought it would have made even Jace smile. Thinking of Jace Rook now, Kael felt the loss, but not as immediate or sharp. The table conversation and Mara's simple gesture had blunted the pain, and Kael felt like himself for the first time in 2 days. Third watch began the same way it always did, in the ready room. The pilot's ready room sat just off the main hangar. It was a functional space with a large conference-style hollow table and a smaller tactical table. There was a central tactical display and walls lined with display screens and status boards. It still smelled faintly of coolant and heated circuitry since it shared ventilation with the hangar, like the ghost of the last scramble never fully leaving. Senior Petty Officer Kael Rynn stood at attention near the rear of the room, and across from him stood Nu 1. The small tactical table stood in front of them, separating them from their squadron leader. Lieutenant Dren Ignala filled the space without effort. 6'4", broad-shouldered, posture straight without being rigid. His white blonde hair was cut short, and his gray cybernetic eyes reflected the soft glow of the hollow display behind him. To his right stood Sub-Lieutenant Grint Montmore. Where Ignala was solid, Montmore was sharp. Lean, almost wiry, with jet-black hair and those unmistakable green eyes. Too vivid to be natural. A gift from the head of House Montmore, and a fact he wore like a badge of superiority. His arms were folded behind his back, chin slightly elevated, as if even standing still required an audience. The room was quiet until Ignala broke the silence. "Review," he said simply, and the hollow display flickered to life. The Corvette appeared in miniature, formation vectors, fighter positions, telemetry streams frozen in time. Then it moved, and Kael watched it all again. New squadrons approach, the wedge formation tightening, the moment the PD turrets went dark, and then Nu 4 breaking formation. Pause. Ignala didn't raise his voice. The display froze on the divergence, a single blue marker pulling ahead. "Ensign Paskin," Ignala said, tone even. "Disregarded formation integrity in pursuit of personal engagement advantage." Sub-Lieutenant Montmore shifted slightly but said nothing. Ignala turned his head just enough. "Sub-Lieutenant Montmore." "Yes, sir." "What do you see?" Montmore straightened a fraction more. "A failure of discipline and doctrine, sir." "Correct." Ignala nodded once, waited a moment, then said, "Expand." Montmore hesitated, just briefly. "A noble pilot abandoning coordinated strike parameters for individual gain compromises squadron effectiveness and increases risk exposure to all adjacent elements." Ignala studied him for a moment before saying coldly, "Acceptable answer, though incomplete." Montmore's jaw tightened slightly as Dren Ignala stepped closer to the display, gesturing toward the frozen divergence. "This is not about risk exposure," he said. "This is about discipline." His gaze shifted back to Montmore. You do not break formation. Not for glory, not for kills, not for recognition. Each word landed clean. You are part of a unit. You act as a unit. You win as a unit. A pause. Or you die alone. Montmore held his gaze. Yes, sir. Lieutenant Ignala didn't look away, his gray cybernetic eyes boring into the sub-lieutenant's sparkling green ones. I will make this perfectly clear, he continued. I do not care if the opportunity presents itself to personally destroy an enemy capital ship. If you are in formation, you remain in formation. The lieutenant's statement caused the noble pilot to pause, considering. Do you understand me, sub-lieutenant? Grint Montmore's voice was rigid now. Yes, sir. Ignala nodded once. Good, he affirmed, before turning back to the display. Resume. The simulation drawn from the battle data continued. New 3's marker shifted, and Kael felt it before he saw it. Jace, moving to cover. Ignala didn't pause this time. Warrant Officer Rook identified an imminent threat to his wingman and acted accordingly, he said. The explosion followed, and 3 markers vanished. Kael didn't move, but noticed the feeling of watching the markers vanish was blunted, the pain more distant. Pause. Silence filled the room as Ignala turned, facing both of them now. Paskin is dead due to pure, glory-seeking vanity, he repeated, voice as sharp as it had been over comms the previous day. And what did that gain him? His eyes settled on Montmore, then shifted to the senior petty officer. Warrant Officer Rook, Ignala continued, quieter now but no less firm, did his duty without hesitation, a true Navy pilot. Kael held his gaze. Remember that. I obey, Kael said. Ignala studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. Good. Then he stepped closer. Senior Petty Officer Rynn. Yes, my lord. You understand your role in this squadron. It wasn't a question, but Kael answered anyway. Yes, my lord. Ignala's expression didn't change. Tell me. Kael's jaw clenched, just slightly. Nobles lead and commoners follow. Nobles command, he said. Commoners obey. Dren Ignala nodded once. Expand. Kael didn't hesitate this time. Commoner pilots are responsible for maintaining formation integrity, supporting assigned noble elements, and mitigating threat vectors directed at command assets, he paused, up to and including self-sacrifice. The words sat in the air between the commoner and noble, heavy and final. The gray cybernetic eyes of the squadron leader watched him carefully. It would be preferable, he said, that all pilots return alive. Another long pause. But preference does not dictate reality. Kael said nothing. Ignala stepped back slightly, returning to a more neutral stance. Your responsibility is to ensure the survival of this squadron's command structure, he continued. That includes Sub-Lieutenant Montmore. Montmore didn't look at Kael, nor did Kael look at him. Yes, my lord, Kael said, and Ignala's gaze softened just a fraction. For what it is worth, he added, Warrant Officer Rook performed with distinction. Kael swallowed once. Yes, my lord. Ignala turned back to the display, letting it run through the rest of the engagement. The corvette's destruction, the withdrawal. Then he deactivated it, and the room dimmed slightly as the hollow faded, and silence settled in. Final notes, Ignala said, looking at Kael again. Your engagement on the corvette's aft defense grid was effective, he said. 2 PD turrets disabled under sustained fire. A small nod. You fought well. It wasn't praise given lightly, and Kael inclined his head. Thank you, my lord. Montmore shifted, as if about to say something, then thought better of it, but Ignala had noticed. Sub-Lieutenant Montmore, he said. Yes, sir. You will review this engagement in full and submit a written analysis before the next watch." The young noble's face was expressionless as he said, "Yes, sir." "Focus on formation discipline and command hierarchy." Montmore's jaw twitched again. "Yes, sir." Ignala shared a final glance between them before turning back to the hollow displays. "That will be all," the lieutenant said as he turned and headed for the hatch. Montmore followed a step behind, posture still rigid, expression carefully neutral. At the threshold, Ignala paused, and without turning, as Grint Montmore exited fuming. Without turning, Dren Ignala spoke once more. "Senior Petty Officer." Kael straightened slightly. "My lord?" After a brief pause, the nobleman seemed to make an internal decision and turned to face the commoner. Kael was stunned to see something on the lieutenant's face. Not his usual look of command authority, but softer, more human. Could it be compassion? Kael wondered, feeling out of balance at the moment. "Senior," he said, then stopped. "Rynn." There was another pause as the lieutenant wrestled with something internally. Finally, he said, "Kael." Shocked at being addressed by his name, Kael stammered, "Yes, my lord?" "The loss of a man is never easily borne. Do not let grief make its home within you." Kael didn't answer immediately. "I obey." Ignala nodded once and exited, and the hatch slid shut behind him, leaving Kael alone. The ready room felt larger without them, and he stood there for a moment, staring at the dark hollow display. The battle replay was gone now. No formation markers, no telemetry, no frozen icons marking the place where New 3 had vanished. Just an empty display. Kael exhaled slowly. Nobles lead and commoners follow. The words sounded different now. He felt different now. Nobles like Grint Montmore commanded. Nobles like Dren Ignala, Kael thought. Those are the nobles who lead. He moved to his usual chair and sat heavily, setting his helmet beside him. The room was quiet, except for the distant hum of the engines. Somewhere beyond the bulkheads, thousands of crewmen and officers were carrying on with their duties. Maintenance crews, deck apes, medics, marines, and pilots. Life continued, no matter what happened, as it always did and always would. Jace had known that, lived it, and had died by it. Kael leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped loosely together, and thought of Ignala's words. "The loss of a man is never easily borne. Do not let grief make its home within you." A noble's words, yet they didn't sound hollow or condescending. Not this time, and Kael wondered if that advice came from Ignala's personal experience. Kael closed his eyes. For a moment he could see Jace exactly as he had been, leaning against a bulkhead with that permanently unimpressed expression, holding that battered metal cup, delivering some dry observation that was somehow funnier because he never smiled while saying it. The memory hurt, but less than he expected. "Don't let grief make a home in me," Kael muttered. The words felt strange coming from his own mouth. Jace was gone, and that wasn't changing. No amount of anger would change it, and no amount of grief would bring him back, but neither would pretending his death didn't matter. Kael let out a quiet, humorless breath. "Yeah," he said softly, "working on it." His eyes opened again, and immediately another face appeared in his thoughts. Wyatt Staples. Kael frowned. Not now. He didn't want to think about Staples, the commoner lieutenant. Didn't want to think about the warning that had saved New Squadron or the man who had crippled a black cruiser. Yet the thoughts came anyway. Jace Rook was dead and Wyatt Staples was alive, and that simple truth sat in his chest like a dull splinter. Not the sharp pain of the previous day, but not gone altogether either. Kael didn't think Staples deserved to die in Jace's place, because Kael didn't think he did. That was the problem. The man kept earning his place and proving people wrong. Every time he did, The world Kael had known his entire life made a little less sense than it had before. The ship hummed around him, unchanged and uncaring. After another moment, Kael pushed himself back to his feet. Third watch had started. There was still work to do, and whether he liked it or not, both the fleet and life kept moving forward. Kael rubbed a hand across his face. "Don't let grief make its home within you," he repeated quietly. Maybe that was the real danger. Not grief or anger, but resentment, though he wasn't sure there was a difference anymore. Quietly, somewhere deep inside him, Kael also felt the growing glimmer of something else when he pictured Wyatt Staples. Respect.